All right. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me fine. We are here with Geoffroy Patriarche and Maxime Audinet. If you have no problem, everybody, we'll just wait 1 or 2 minutes so that everybody can connect easily, and then we'll get started with this lunch lecture with Maxime Audinet. Yeah. Mhm. All right. It is now 1:03, so I propose that we start. Geoffroy, can you give me this if you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect then. Uh, so hello everybody and welcome. Welcome to this lunch lecture. It will be the last lunch lecture of the year, and I'm really happy to welcome you, everybody, and to welcome Maxime Audinet, who will be presenting today. Just before we start, I'd like to give you a few words about EDMO BELUX, about the lunch lectures, and then about Maxime and his presentation. So EDMO, as you know, is the European Digital Media Observatory, which brings together fact checkers, so journalists, experts, media literacy experts, and academic researchers to tackle, fight, or understand better disinformation. And within EDMO, EDMO Belux is the hub that focuses on Belgium, or no French-speaking Belgium and Luxembourg. And within that context, we organize lunch lectures, which is a series of webinar. I see some familiar names, so I think most of you uh, already know. But it is a series of webinars that are aimed at understanding better disinformation, but also topics that relate to disinformation, such as polarization, and so on. Today, I am very, very happy to welcome Maxime Audinet. Maxime is a research fellow at IRSEM. So in French, it is the Institut de Recherche Stratégique de l'École Militaire. So I think in English, it will be something like Institute for Strategic Research from the Military Academy in France. Uh, he is a specialist, of course, of Russian politics because he has a PhD in political science as well as and Slavic studies from the University of Paris-Nanterre. Today, Maxime will be talking about the narrative dimension of Russian foreign policy, focusing on the resurgence story of the anti-neo-colonial narrative. He will be explaining what that exactly means since the invasion of Ukraine and how this narrative has taken shape in the later years. And I think he has a paper that he published that I read that he will probably send us at the end or recommend us to read. But I think Maxime is the best to be talking about his study, so I will let him do that. Just a few housekeeping rules before we do so. Presentation will be about 30 minutes long. Please feel free to ask your questions in the chat as the presentation go along. I will not give the questions to Maxime until the end of the presentation, unless it's a really short question or a housekeeping question, like the screen is frozen or something like that. But if it's more of a content question, we'll keep the question for the end of the presentation. And then, of course, if you have further questions, we only are one email away. So once again, Maxime, thank you for joining us. And the floor is yours, I guess. Metaphorically.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Victor. Can you just confirm that you can see my slides? It's okay for you?
Your slide
Perfect.
down with neocolonialism, we can
Okay,
see
great.
and we can hear you fine. So it's perfect.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you, everyone, for being here during lunchtime. So yes, I'm very happy actually to share the results of this research I have conducted over the past month, and in which I show that since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russian officials and foreign policy agents have actually reframed anti-Western criticism into a new updated anti-neocolonial strategic narratives, and I will explain you what I mean by this expression, which actually provides a better framework for analyzing Russia's evolving role in world politics, for analyzing its foreign policy preferences and propaganda practices, and also for analyzing its perceptions of the international system and contestation of the Western-based liberal international order. This is a research I have, thank you, Victor, for mentioning it, just published both actually in French and in English in our publications at IRSEM, so I can send it to you if you want. And I'd like to start this presentation with this quite intriguing statement by Vladimir Putin just after the signature of the annexation treaties of the 4 occupied regions of Ukraine in September 2022. And it is intriguing because of, as you can see, the unusual use of a rhetoric from another era in this very specific context. It is intriguing, and sorry, I quote, so we are proud that in the 20th century, our country led the anti-colonial movement. And again, that we did not, I quote, we did not allow Western elites to rob us during the period of colonial conquests. So actually, even a superficial observation of the Russian political discourse since the 24th of February 2022 shows that beyond the bellicose rhetoric that is related to the war in Ukraine itself, the lexical field of anti-colonialism has actually resurfaced to diversify Russia's well-known denunciation of Western interventionism and Western foreign policy in general. The use of this discourse in this very special context is actually puzzling for at least 3 reasons. First, because the lexical spectrum of Russian anti-Westernism is already highly diversified, as you may know. So the collective West, as they say in Russia, has been labeled as unipolar, hegemonic, Russophobic, decadent, neoliberal, non-traditional, and so on. Second, because it is intriguing because anti-colonialism was, of course, at the core of Soviet foreign policy and internationalist commitment before virtually disappearing from the Russian political discourse and especially diplomatic discourse with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it is puzzling, finally, because this account of Russia's role may actually seem paradoxical at a time when Moscow's aggression of Ukraine has been analyzed as a form of neo-imperial adventurism or even a neo-colonial manifestation of its foreign policy. Now, the second aspect I've been interested in this research, and which is actually my research hypothesis, is the storytelling dimension of this discourse, its employment and transformation into a narrative by various actors that use it to support and legitimize Russia's foreign policy. Like other fields and subfields, the discipline of international relations have been affected in recent years by the so-called narrative turn in the social sciences. This approach, which is, for those who know the theory of international relation, is mainly driven by constructivism. And above all, it emphasizes the importance of narratives as a means of understanding, explaining, and analyzing international politics and foreign policy behaviors. Narratives are a widespread normative form of discourse through which we as individuals or as social groups assemble disparate facts and turn events into coherent patterns to make sense of a chaotic reality, to make sense of our experiences, of our identities, behaviors, or interests. And among the important literature that has been devoted to this issue in international relations, especially in foreign policy analysis or in security studies, those authors, Miskimen, Rosell, and O'Loughlin, have proposed this instrumental concept of strategic narratives that some of you may know, which has become one of the most comprehensive and probably cited conceptual framework on the narrative dimension of foreign policy, of influence, and more generally of the manifestation of power in international politics. And according to these scholars, strategic narratives aim, I quote, to construct a shared meaning of the past, present, and future of international politics to shape the behavior of international actors. They distinguish three types of strategic narratives at different scales. So you have international system narratives that describe the world politics in general. For example, they take the example of the clash of civilization or the notion of war on terror. You have identity narratives, so the way countries portray himself in narrative terms. Take, for example, the US as the land of the free, or France as the country of human rights, we could say. And at last, you have issue-specific narratives that are constructed to legitimize a specific policy. And in these authors, they focus on the process, on this storytelling process through the formation, circulation, and reception of the strategic narrative. And I'm going mostly to focus in this research on the first two processes, on the formation and circulation of this narrative. So to get back to Russia, actually extensive research has already highlighted the strategic narratives that have been shaped and disseminated by Russia, starting from the state and non-state actors of its foreign policy, mainly in the post-Soviet space and in Western countries. Another body of research has also shown that the efficiency and the persuasiveness of Russia's strategic narratives are related to their degree of acceptance and appropriation by target audiences, and especially by they're related to their ability to resonate with audiences' local political myth or with specific historical and memory references. And this is actually the case, you will see, of the anti-colonial strategic narrative. From there, I have suggested three research avenues, which consist first in starting from a seemingly visible strategic narrative to study its construction and circulation from its formulation in the Russian domestic political discourse and IR debate to its projection by the actors of what we call with my colleagues Russia's ecosystem of information influence abroad, especially in Africa, as you will see. Second, it consists in exploring the potential to infer foreign policy preferences through the analysis of strategic narratives, particularly when their use and circulation among political elites, in the doctrines, in the public debates, in the media environments reach a significant scale, which is once again the case of this specific narrative. And at last, it consists in decentering the investigation on Russian strategic narratives by exploring its projection towards non-Western audiences, especially in Africa, in a context of Russia's hope for rapprochement with the countries of the global South that I have labeled actually a kind of turn to the South, which is a reference to the turn to the East, a well-known turn to the East that have been implemented in Russia over the past decade. And at last, my research questions focuses on different dimensions. So first, a focus on the agency. Who are the storytellers, the narrators of Russia's updated anti-neocolonial strategic narrative? A focus on the framing. how has it been formulated by Russian foreign policy actors and in the domestic political discourse, a focus on the circulation, how has it been disseminated by Russian propaganda and by the actors of Russia's information influence abroad. And at last, I focus on the meaning and on the objectives of this strategic, narrative resurgence by wondering why this narrative has resurfaced in the context of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and what does it reveal about contemporary Russia's foreign policy preferences. Regarding the methodology, I'm going to be a little bit quick on that, but this work is part of a bigger project on Russian digital fieldwork we have developed with several colleagues in a research collective we have founded, which is called Coruscant, like the planet in Star Wars, for those who have the reference, and which is also it means actually something. In French, it's the Collectif de recherche sur la Russie contemporaine pour l'analyse de ses nouvelles trajectoires. And it is the European branch of the Russia program at the George Washington University, And basically, the idea of this collective is actually to answer to what a famous Russian political scientist, Vladimir Gelman, has called the exogenous shock of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which has considerably deteriorated our research conditions and made the already highly sensitive fieldwork in authoritarian Russia almost inaccessible for most scholars in the field. And this is actually my case and the case of many of my different colleagues. And so this is a major challenge for our discipline. And we believe at Coruscant that we cannot study Russia the way we used to, and that this critical situation demands an inevitable and potentially very fruitful reinvention of our methods, as evidenced by the so-called acceleration of the computational turn in Russian studies that have really accelerated over the past 3 years, actually. And so in this research, I've used a mixed, mainly qualitative methodology, which is based on the analysis of textual and audiovisual data from multilingual corpora in Russian, French, and English, which represent a body of primary sources that are actually potential vectors of narratives, like political speeches, doctrines, media content, video clips, images, and social any social media content. And the digital data that form the largest corpora were extracted and analyzed using digital investigation tool, like, for those who know a little bit this kind of methods, like Octoparse for the data scrapping, and the GDELT database, the television explorer of the GDELT database, and also a software called IRAMUTEC for computational textual analysis and topic modeling. So now to get back to the results of this research. So the construction of a foreign policy narrative results from an elaborate process that involves multiple state and non-state actors. As quoted by Ronald Krebs, who is also a famous scholar in security studies, in his research on Roosevelt's discourses during World War II, presidency is a great source of narrative authority, especially in terms of foreign and security policy, I quote. And so I'll start with Vladimir Putin himself by observing a large corpus of over 7,300 Putin statements that I have extracted from the Kremlin website, and that have been pronounced by Putin since his accession to presidency in 2000. And I have compared the use of this anti-colonial rhetoric with the well-known Russian conservative discourse of traditional values, as you can see on this graph. So there is, as you see, a clear inflation of this lexical field of colonialism in Putin's discourse since February 2022, as Putin has used it more just in 2023 than in the rest of all his presidency between 2000 and 2021. And he actually did, so I can give you some specific examples, but he actually did it both while addressing domestic audiences. So I have given you here an example of a meeting with religious authorities where Putin stands again, I quote, the preservation of a neocolonial system and the division of world majority. I'll get back to this notion later. But he did so also by addressing foreign audiences in international summits, for example, like the former Russia-Africa summit in St. Petersburg, last summit, where Putin said that Russia is at the forefront of a fairer, multipolar order deprived of neocolonialism. So this narrative also finds a very strong echo far beyond the presidential discourse, with key figures of the regime involved, like Sergei Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, late founder of Wagner, Yevgeny Prigozhin, I'll get back to him later, or also here Dmitry Medvedev, who is now the Vice President of the Security Council, and he published this a few months ago, this pamphlet entitled "The Time of Metropolis is Over." Published it in the governmental newspaper Российская газета, and he uses this lexical field 73 times, especially by describing Ukraine as, I quote, a neo-colonial bridgehead of the West, where you can see that actually neocolonialism is regarded in Russia not only as a threat to African country, but also to Russia itself, by pretending that that the West has also tried to colonize Russia, which is actually a very old narrative, historical narrative that I could talk about later if you want. And Medvedev's columns actually follows a number of parliamentary meetings and events that have been organized since 2023 by the State Duma, including, I quote, a forum of supporters of the struggle against modern practices of neocolonialism that has been organized by the United Russia Party, which is Putin's party, in February 2024, in the presence of many African MPs, and especially also the president of the Central African Republic, Faustin Archange-Touadéra, who is an important figure because of for Russian foreign policy, because of its very close relationship with the Wagner Group in the Central African Republic. The Russian diplomatic network is also involved through its traditional communications and through its so-called digital diplomacy. So it has the Russian diplomacy has also worked to shape and to spread this anti-neocolonial narrative. And you have here the case of the Russian embassy account in South Africa, which is an important asset of Russian information influence in Africa, having, I think, today 180,000 followers on X, so which is one of the most active in the promotion of anti-Western content in Africa. And you can actually notice on this screenshot on the right an overlap between the anti-colonial narrative and the critique of Western-led so-called Western-led color revolutions in the post-Soviet space, like for example the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. So you have once again a kind of comparison and parallel with what the West has done in Africa and what they have done in the post-Soviet space, so in the Russian political discourse. And at last, this anti-colonial narrative has been formalized for the first time in the last foreign policy concept of 2023, which is an official document that both gives signals about Russian foreign policy orientations abroad, but which also provides a rhetorical repertoire for the domestic bureaucracy in charge. And this is also very important. And you have 6 occurrences in this doctrine of this anti-colonial narrative, including in an article devoted to Russian-African relationships, so the one at the bottom, which stands, I quote, that Russia stands in solidarity with the African states in their desire for a more equitable polycentric world and elimination of social and economic inequality, which is growing due to the sophisticated neo-colonial policies of some developed states towards Africa. And interestingly, in the Russian version, the West is mentioned clearly. This is the I have given you here the official translation in English, but it's Russian. It's even more explicit, I would say. And at last, also, sorry, regarding this place in the domestic context, this anti-colonial narrative also resonates with other buzzwords that have been, catchwords that have been proposed, sometimes actually quite competitively, by Russian official expertise, by the Russian spin doctor, sorry, and so-called political technologists, which is I would say, a network of actors which proposes a concept to frame Russia's position in the international order and to propose notions to the Kremlin to precisely give a sort of a narrative substance to its policy. And this is the case of this rising notion of world majority, in Russian mировое большинство, which was proposed by this guy, Sergei Karaganov, which is a very well-known Russian IR expert close to the Kremlin, and which shows that he wants to show through this notion of world majority that if Russia is geographically and historically not part of the so-called global south, which is also a very trendy notion, the Russian regime still wants the country to be strongly connected to it in a more inclusive entity, and possibly to be at the forefront of this world majority in order, and I quote the notions that are used in this discourse, in order to oppose the Western world minority, to preserve its identity as a state civilization, and to contribute to the de-Westernization of the international system. So this is a notion that is also very much articulated to this anti-colonial strategic narrative and to this attempt by Russia to contest precisely the Western-based liberal international order. So beyond this official production, I have also conducted research on the dissemination of this narrative by this ecosystem of Russia's information influence. Just to give you several elements about this ecosystem, this is another research we have just published actually with my colleague Colin Gérard, on where we have tried to understand how the war in Ukraine had completely transformed this ecosystem, and the actors within this ecosystem have very strongly adapted to this new conflictuality in the information space since the invasion of Ukraine. So this is so just to show you that we have designed this actor mapping of actually which represent the whole known ecosystem of Russia's information influence and the way these different actors interact with each other. And so we divide this ecosystem into three categories of state actors. So you have transnational state media, RT and Sputnik, or intelligence services. You have non-official actors, like, for example, the Wagner Group and what we have called the Prigozhin's galaxy. I don't have time to get into details, but these actors are very interesting and important, to understand the flexibility of Russia's information influence ecosystem. And at last, well, there is a third category, which we have labeled as the third-party foreign actors, which are basically I would say the foreign actors who choose for lucrative, militant, or ideological reason to cooperate with Russian actors, maybe in Europe or in Africa, Latin America, the US, etc., etc. So this is not the topic of this presentation, but we can discuss it further if you want. So I have focused on three of these actors. The Prigozhin's galaxy, which is related to Wagner and to Yevgeny Prigozhin. I've focused also on transnational state media RT and Sputnik and the way they convey this narrative, and also on the last actor called African Initiative, but I will explain you later which organization it is. So I'll start with Wagner. The Wagner Group and the Prigozhin's galaxy. Why? Because actually the Wagner Group is a pioneer in the development and the dissemination of this post-Soviet anti-colonial narrative, which has been used at least since 2019 in Wagner's information operations in parallel with its expansion in sub-Saharan Africa, in particular to undermine its designated opponents, including the French military during the Opération Barkhane, the Barkhane operation in the Sahel region. So this is, for example, here, I think, an interesting material, which is a picture that was designed by Prigozhin and published on his VK account from Vkontakte, which is a Russian social network, where he compared the transitional president of Mali, Assimi Goïta, to the African Che Guevara, which was an expression that was used in the 80s to qualify Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso. So he used this comparison, but also this dimension is very visible in the cultural products that have been promoted by Wagner, and that actually profoundly this narrative dimension, the use of characters to promote a specific discourse. So you have cartoons, films, clips, most of them using anthropomorphism, as you can see here, to praise the Russian bear. So this is the case on this cartoon on the left, which was released in Bangui, the capital of the Central African Republic, especially in schools, to promote the position of this Russian bear who comes to Central African Republic to help a lion and oppose the French hyenas. But this is also the case of this rat you see on the right. The screen, this video clip has been titled Le Rat Emmanuel, so you can see the reference, I guess. But the idea is really to portray this this French presence in particular as a scavenger, and these different material have been promoted by the Prigozhin's so-called Larta project, which is a project of information influence that is more well-known with this notion of troll farms or the Internet Research Agency of St. Petersburg in particular. But this network has also a very strong network in sub-Saharan Africa, which is actually called Africa Politology, for those who would like to know more about it. I also show that this narrative has been strongly promoted by transnational state media RT and Sputnik, the presence of which is really rising in Africa since these two media's ban and suspension within the EU just a few days after the invasion of Ukraine. So here I've conducted this lexicometric analysis comparing RT, Al Jazeera and the BBC's programs in English. And you can see that there is a very clear breakthrough in the use of this notion on air compared to other media since March 2022, so just a few days actually after the invasion. And this new framing by RT was reflected in several advertising campaigns, like this one in India, which was labeled, "Why does the West still see India as a third world country?" But also I think more interestingly, and I think that this advertising campaign is super interesting to understand actually to understand Russian foreign policy in Africa as a whole. So this is a campaign called Your Values Shared, which was organized in several English-speaking African capitals, and which has consisted in quoting anti-colonial statements by major historical figures of independence or of Pan-Africanism, like, for example, on the left, Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, which is well known for his book Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. So this is a paraphrase actually of his title, and this is, I think, a campaign that actually embodies an attempt for political, discursive, and ideological convergence between Russian and African actors that I'll talk about just in the conclusion. And at last, I've conducted this lexicometric analysis of the content produced by African Initiative, which is the new flagship of post-Prigozhin Russian information influence in the Sahel region, and which is a new, I would say, self-claim news agencies that is aimed to legitimize the action of this new Russian expeditionary force in the Sahel region called the Africa Corps, which is supposed to replace the Wagner Group, even if they don't really succeed in doing so. But this is once again another issue. And what is interesting with African Initiative is that it is allegedly, according to the Russian independent media, it is driven by a guy who is an agent of the 5th Service of the FSB. And so I have conducted this topic modeling of a corpus of almost 500 articles produced by African Initiative between September 2023 and February 2024. And I show, so you can see this lexical cluster here in green, that this topic of this denunciation of Western neocolonialism actually occupies a significant part of the, as we say in this methodology, of the lexical surface of the whole content that is produced by this specific media. So to conclude, I would like to discuss the whys of these strategic narratives. And so actually, I show that through this narrative, Russia is actually trying to achieve 3 objectives. The first consists in actually, by using this narrative, the Russian authorities want to give historical depth and thereby legitimacy to their foreign policy by using a strategic narrative that is an update, of course, of the Soviet support for decolonization movement, especially in Africa. What is interesting is that it relies on a selective instrumentalization of the past, of this memory, in line with the so-called politics of the past that has been conducted by Putin's regime, and that is selective, because what is emphasized is the Soviet opposition to Western imperialism, in particular under Khrushchev and Brezhnev, while the most progressive orientation of communist internationalism and anti-colonialism, or the criticism of Russian colonialism itself during the imperial era, which was at the core of Soviet early Bolshevik anti-colonialism, if you want. All of this, of course, is completely muted or removed from this narrative construct. Secondly, the second objective is to revive and reframe the anti-interventionist critique of the collective West. So you know that Russia is one of the most vocal country in the world when it comes to the formulation of a de-Westernized post-liberal international order. And this anti-neocolonial narrative is meant to enrich Moscow's long-standing foreign policy, actually meta-narrative, long defended by Russian statist realists in particular, about the emergence of a multipolar or polycentric international system, which would be threatened by US-led Western hegemony and unilateralism. And in the context of Russia's aggression of Ukraine, this narrative is also used as a whataboutist argument, which is something I'm trying to show by many examples in this research. Why? Because it is designed to reverse the accusation by suggesting that Western behaviors, including in Ukraine, are essentially neo-colonial and aggressive, while Russia, on the contrary, has never been a colonial power in Africa or Latin America, while the war in Ukraine actually is often perceived as the results of a great power contestation within the global north. And several actually very interesting research have been conducted, including by Willy Steger, for example, on how the war in Ukraine is perceived in several countries in West Africa. And last result, throughout this narrative, the Russian authorities also try to appeal to the publics of the so-called global south or the world majority by using a narrative that is also developed elsewhere. And we get back to this notion of, this idea of consensus around shared meaning that is at the core of strategic narrative. So if you take the Sahelian country, like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, where the Russian presence is actually growing, Russia is not the cause nor does it have a monopoly on the rising narrative that pre-exists in West African societies. And this is precisely why this narrative that is co-produced is also exploited and reframed by Russian actors to create this discursive or ideological convergence with local actors that also have a very strong agency in this process. And I'm thinking in particular about this so-called neo-Pan-Africanist movement or neo-sovereignist movement in Africa, which is a very strong tendency that we are observing, actually, that especially South Africa are observing in many countries in the continent. So, and just a phrase to conclude, to say that this research also should also result in new research avenues. So if some of you have ideas, they're very much welcome. So the idea would be to explore also the reception of this narrative in targeted societies, and also the feedback effect of this narrative resurgence in the Russian domestic context itself. And I just wanted to give you this interesting example of the renaming in March 2023 of Russia's famous People's Friendship University, which was very famous during the Cold War. And it was renamed with its former name, that of the Congolese Pan-Africanist leader, Patrice Lumumba, which was given up just after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I think this is an interesting illustration also of this phenomenon. Thank you for your attention. I'd be very happy to answer questions or give you some further details about this research. Thank you.
Well, I'll be the only one applauding, but I'm still giving you a big round of applause. Thank you very much. So now if you have questions, so people can clap. Okay, that's good. If you have questions, now would be the time. There's one first question from Grégoire Regmans. People that I know, I will introduce. People that I don't, I will not, obviously. Grégoire is a journalist at the RTBF, so the French-speaking public media in Belgium. He's asking, is Russia also trying to push its anti-colonial narrative through the BRICS? So meaning, I think, Brazil and what is it? Brazil, South Africa, China, and India. There's a plus then. Yeah.
Yes. Do you know if I can see the questions are in the comments? Okay. Yes. To answer this question, yeah, absolutely. Actually, there was recently the BRICS summit in Kazan, as you may know, and this once again this anti-colonial narrative was used in this context, as it was used in different kind of other fora, especially the Russia-Africa summit, but it is also used in the BRICS summit, along with this notion of world majority, actually, because there is a very strong attempt by these Russian actors to push for these notions and to make them reused and appropriated by other non-Western countries, and this is especially the case of this world majority notion, which is the idea is basically to have people in other countries to use this notion, considering that narratives are not only descriptive, they have also a performative dimension and transformative dimension. And by using these notions, the idea, if you want, is really to have these foreign actors contribute also to this transformation and de-Westernization of a transitional international order. And of course, the BRICS Summit are a place where these notions of the end of the Western-based liberal international is very much discussed, actually. So yeah, it makes sense to have these notions also promoted in this forum. Absolutely.
Okay, and then there's another question from Grégoire, which I think is more of a comment, but I'll still give it to you. He said, isn't it just real politics to use the lack of consideration of Western countries for Africa, France in particular, to push this kind of narratives, he says.
What's the beginning of the question, sorry?
Isn't it? Oh, you can't see Maxime. You can see the Q&A if you click on Q&A.
No, for some reasons I don't know where it is, or maybe I'm not on the good place.
I'll just try to go slower and give it my best English accent.
No problem. No problem.
he said, isn't it just real politics, so actual politics, to use the lack of consideration of Western countries for Africa, France in particular, to push this kind of narrative? Isn't it just real politics, something that has just always been done, I guess?
You mean, is it de bonne guerre, as we would say in French?
I guess that's the comment. Yeah.
Yes, of course, of course it is, and actually this what makes this narrative effective and very strong, and which explains also I think the very high difficulty that especially the French authorities it's very difficult for them to answer and to counter precisely this narrative in that France is developing now a new strategy of influence, as we say, over the past few years. It's actually very much correlated with the role of Wagner in the Sahel region and the end of the Opération Barkhane. And we know that this ability to produce an effective, not only counter-narrative, but also an effective narrative itself, for example, to explain the role of the French military in the Sahel region has been a huge challenge for the French military. So I think that, the Russian actors, they benefited from this discursive vacuum, we could say, and also from, of course, the memory of colonialism, which to which it's very difficult to answer. I mean, no one would. I think that no one would consider a good idea to try to justify the colonization in France. It would be completely absurd.
No.
So
Yeah.
another option, I think, would be if it's not my position as a scholar, but if I would have to advise something to these people, I would say that instead of trying to stay in the framing of that the Russian actors are trying to impose, especially in terms of anti-colonialism, we should propose an alternative and different framing, saying, for example, that it is absurd that Russia is defending this anti-colonial position just at a time where they're conducting this neo-imperial aggression in Ukraine. And actually, if you talk with Ukrainian people about the fact that Russia today is trying to defend anti-neocolonial, to oppose neocolonialism, it's completely, completely crazy for them, of course, in this very specific context. But yeah, they're completely using this because of Western former colonial power. History, actually. So it makes it. And actually, I'm sorry, just to go on with that, but I think it also shows you, I think, through what I wanted to show through this research is that we should also go much beyond this disinformation framework to understand Russian influence and propaganda abroad, because precisely what I'm trying to show with this use of narrative is that you can use, of course, lies, and you can use disinformation. This was the case, for example, of the Gossi case. I don't know if you've heard about this history in Mali, where the Russians have tried to, when the French military has tried to withdraw from Mali, has withdrawn from Mali, the Wagner has tried to has actually conducted a disinformation operation online, pretending that the French military has killed many people and created a mass grave in Gossi, which is a former French base in Mali. And actually, the operation was debunked by the French Ministry of Armed Forces, and they've shown on the whole process. But here it was a fake. But in many ways, the Russian is using, and you can see this is reflected in the notions they are using now. They are using true events to produce this narrative. So stuff that really, events that really happened. I don't know. For example, Putin used, since we have Belgian colleagues here in the audience. Putin used this reference to I think the the Congolese was imprisoned in prison in Brussels, I think, in human zoo, you know, and he used these references to say that, look, it was actually during the Russia-Africa summit. Look at what the Belgian did back in the 50s, or I don't remember exactly when it was, but basically, yeah, look at what they did at that time. How can't we understand that the African populations still want to cooperate with Western powers, etc., etc. So but yeah, basically.
Yeah, that's the thing with narratives. Huh? You can use a mix of fake news, disinformation, real news to construct this like
half truth, half fake, and yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's when it becomes difficult to deal with disinformation in that sense. I see that there is two more questions. There's one that's more methodological, but before that, then I will read it to you. We observe how Russia's narrative has shifted in the context of the war in Ukraine from a focus on the struggle against neo-Nazism to framing it as a fight against Western neocolonialism then. Which textual analysis method would you recommend for studying this evolution? Okay, so it's also a methodological question then.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I actually think that what is interesting is that these narratives are in fact combined in many ways. What I mean by that is that this resurgence of a neocolonial narrative is not followed by an exclusion of former narrative that we all know, so the denazification of Ukraine. So basically, yeah, I think that both are combined, and actually this is not surprising when you know the Russian ideological context, where many different ideologies, discourses, and narratives are combined, even if they are sometimes contradictory. It can also be the case. But what I would suggest, if you want to analyze this kind of shift, you can use different methods that are like computational textual analysis. For example, there are many, including open access software. So it takes quite a long time to endorse this kind of tools, but I prefer them. I prefer to do it myself by using these open access tools rather than paying, sometimes hundreds, if not thousands of euros to have websites that are going to do the textual analysis itself. So I think it's more interesting. You can do also manually, actually. What I did with this graph of Putin using this lexical field, I have, of course, extracted and scraped these articles and statements using a computational tool. But after that, you can simply, observe where these notions are used, how are they used. What is interesting with IRAMUTEC in particular, with this tool of lexicometry, is that it not only lists the number of occurrences of a specific keyword, it also shows how keywords are used with other terms. So it gives you the whole context, basically the so-called lexical world of a specific notion. So, for example, I've conducted another research, where I've tried to show how Putin was talking about Ukraine. And it's interesting to see that if you take the first part of the corpus between 2000 and 2004, you can see that the lexical field that is associated with Ukraine is mostly related to a lexical field of cooperation. While when you have a look at what's happening after 2014 and even more after 2022, the lexical field is much more antagonistic, hostile, using the notion of Nazism, of all these notions that we know very well. But it can show this kind of lexical, discursive, and narrative shifts. And you can do that for political actors, but also for media content, which is, in my case, I've worked a lot on RT, and I've used a lot of these kind of methods to see how, for example, RT is a media that is very responsive to the official discourse. So it is one thing to say that these are state media, but I'm trying to prove it and demonstrate it by using these kind of methodologies, and I think it's quite effective in doing so.
All right. Thank you for this this very practical answer with concrete.
I can send you the links towards this different tools if you're interested. So I can't remember who asked the question, but if you want to send me an email, I can completely send you some and some papers or articles that explain how to use them.
Okay, well, it's Julia who sent the question. So Julia, if you need to, you can send an email to Maxime. I think its email is really easy to find online because I did. But if not, and in general, if you have questions, please you can send them to me or to the through the EDMO BELUX page, and we'll make sure to answer as much as we can. Oh, well, Julia says thank you, Maxime.
You're welcome.
All right, I see it's already 1:56, so I propose that we close the questions here. Again, if you have more questions, please send us an email. I would like to thank you again, Maxime. I put a few links in the conversation, so the link to Coruscant, the link to Hermitech, and so on. But if you agree, Maxime, and of course you can think over it, so we'll put this video online as well as links to your paper in French and in English, so that everybody that was here or even who are not have a chance to read it. So thank you again
so much. Thank you, Victor.
Maxime. You're welcome. The next lunch lecture, guys, will be in February sometime. So I will see you next year. Thank you again for being here every couple of months. It's always really interesting. And yeah, see you next time. Maxime, good afternoon, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Victor. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
See you. Mettre fin à la réunion. Voilà.